Hello and welcome to the 90-Minute Fever podcast with Steve and Nick. For those of you who don't know who we are, I'm Steve. I'm one of the admins in-game. I'm manager of Strictly Butterside Up in the Twilight FA. Nick is the lead developer of 90-Minute Fever. This is the 15th podcast in the series. We hope you enjoyed our previous podcasts. If you're interested in them, they're all available on the ISOQuan YouTube channel, so please take a look at those. We're going to be doing our very best to keep our promise here and do these podcasts shorter and a little more often. I think we've done pretty well here. It's only been a week or two since the last one, so we've got the next one ready for you already here. And as I say, we're going to try and keep them shorter, so they'll be in the half hour to an hour range in general. Okay, today's podcast, quite an interesting one, I think. We're going to be discussing possible future implementations of the manager skills system, which is we've been discussing for a little while. And we're also going to be doing our best to answer a few of the recent questions from users, so questions that we get in-game and questions that we get on the forum. A lot of these are regarding the transfer system, but there's a few other things in there as well. So Nick, let's kick things off with something I think sounds really interesting. I'm sure the listeners will think so too. Let's talk a bit about manager skills and what we could possibly do there.
Yeah, sure. I think maybe the place to start is maybe why we would like to do something in this space. So just quickly, I think the staff in the game, the staff system, we've known for some time now that I don't have notes in front of me, but you're talking long time, I think, since maybe even last year. So you're talking quite a long time here, sort of 9+ months, I think, that we definitely there's issues with the system, really, in that it's just not really fun, basically. It's just not that interesting. It doesn't really add much to the game. It's not engaging. Has sort of fundamental issues, and I think it was never intended that this implementation of the stuff would sort of be the final one. We always intended to add more roles and things like that, but the thing is, it still wouldn't be just if we added a few more roles, it still wouldn't be that engaging. Basically, it's just not good enough from an engagement and fun perspective. Basically, the system fundamentally how it currently works, and part of that, or a big part of that, is really just that it was a lot of the original game design was just much more simulation based than being a game and being sort of like a game and fun and things like that. So this is just part of that legacy, really, that this staff system was originally done more in line with the game being a simulation rather than it being a game. So we want to move this part of the game in the direction of it being adding gameplay, being fun, adding meaningful decisions to the game and stuff like that. So we've known for a long time we want to do something about it, which is why really we haven't done anything much to add more roles or sort of expand that part of the game all this time, because we've just known that we want to replace it. So we've been in the background thinking and discussing and various options, and looking at bits of feedback and ideas that we've got over time in this space, and we're pretty certain that at some point we'd like to do manager skills for this game, to scrap the staff altogether, not have them, and instead essentially replace what the staff currently functionally do in the game with manager skills, but also add a lot more to the game with the manager skills as well. So that's a bit of background. So the idea is that there'll be a series of skills. I'm not sure how many, but a lot. I think you're talking not 5 or 10, but more like 100 or even more. And you would unlock or learn these skills as you progress through the game, and these skills would do various bits that would impact your club or the way that you can approach or play the game, and give you various benefits or changes to the way the game plays for you, and do it in such a way that the just decisions are really meaningful, and add various different strategic and tactical benefits to the gameplay, and mostly strategic, but maybe some tactical bits as well, just more short-term decision making, and just really create different ways for people to play the game, and really so that it over time different users could really have a very different skill set from each other and have sort of a very different set of benefits that they would have, and it would in turn mean that they might fundamentally approach the game in a different way to each other.
Sure.
The other key point of this really is that we don't want it to be the case that you just accumulate these skills over time just because you played the game for longer. So it's not like a lot of games use some kind of timer-based mechanism where you just choose what skill or ability you want to unlock or learn, and it has like a little percentage bar that ticks by as hours pass, and it's just a really passive background thing, and it just means the longer you played for, the more you have. We don't want to do something like that. We want the acquisition of these skills to be, hopefully it doesn't confuse anybody, but we want the acquisition of these skills to be skill-based in that if you're better at the game, you get more skills. For some time, we've felt that a very good way that this could be done is to have achievements in the game and to essentially tie the learning or the unlocking of skills to the unlocking of achievements. So if you achieve something in the game, like for example maybe winning 10 official matches in a row, then you would unlock a skill, and something like that. So there could be a lot of achievements. Obviously there'd need to be if there's a lot of skills, and the thinking is kind of, as a new user, there'll be a lot of really easy achievements, like win a match, maybe something that simple. So as a new user, you would if you're playing the game, you'd very quickly unlock lots of skills, but as you sort of do all of the easy achievements, you would only have the more difficult ones left. So over time you would continue to unlock them, but the rate at which you unlock them would sort of slow down and slow down and slow down, and eventually you would hit your skill ceiling in that you only achieve what you're good enough at the game to achieve, if that makes sense. Very few people, for example, would be able to win 10 official matches in a row. Lots of people would never unlock that skill. It'll always be there, but one day you might, and when you do, you get that skill.
So you get a point for every, for example, you might get a point for every achievement you unlock, and then it's up to you to choose where you want to spend that point.
Yeah, that's the thinking, something along those lines, yeah. So, I'm not sure how clear we made it, but we probably want to reiterate that this is not close. This is a long way off. We're talking well into next year. When this comes, it's just how we operate. These types of changes to the game, they're typically in planning for a long time in regards to ideas, thinking it through, making sure we do the right things. Being in that case, and we just it's not close. So I don't know how to mention. So I don't know how to better reiterate that.
And I guess the reason we're bringing it up now really is because this is something we feel that actually this is a real opportunity to engage the user base, isn't it? We can really get some ideas of what these skills could be, and what the achievements could be, because it's very much an idea at the idea stage at the moment, isn't it? It's not in stone, despite the fact it's been discussed quite a bit. There's plenty of options on the table here, isn't there? Yeah,
there is. There's definitely plenty of options, and there's also the case that we would like to have a vast array of skills and achievements associated with this. So I'm sure there's a lot of ideas that people would have that we have never thought of ourselves in regards to possibilities in this space of what achievements could be and what the skills could do in the game. There's a lot of things that are just completely obvious, but there's also almost like an unlimited number of things that are not obvious at all. There's so much scope for what they could do.
Yeah, I suppose that you can get a big variation from the very easy ones, like you mentioned earlier, win a game or something like that. But then you could, at the other end of the scale, it could be win the SP Cup, couldn't it? There's not going to be many users who are going to be able to unlock that achievement.
Yeah, but, sure. And at the extreme end of this, you could have really... I think the idea is that realistically, you want it to be so that nobody would ever really achieve all of them. no matter how good you are at the game, there is something there for you to still, like, winning the SP Cup is obviously a really difficult achievement, but winning every single competition in the game, for example, could be like, you could have some like ultra late game achievements that people could play, for 30 or 40 years even, and never actually, because you don't want it to be the case that you just complete it, right? You always want there to be something to aim for. So, and I think that essentially means that you've got these skills, and it means that nobody can have all the skills.
Yeah, so you've got to choose where to go, and that's going to be the key of this, isn't it? The decision making. So, do you what area do you specialise in? And you have to make a real choice here, because specialising in something means that you may be lacking somewhere else, and even the very best users aren't going to be able to specialise in everything. Yeah,
we definitely want to forcefully make it that way. We want there to be a choice. We want to force people into making a choice. So yeah, definitely.
Okay, so we've talked a little bit about the types of achievements we could have. We haven't really mentioned possible skills we could put into the game. So will this be? We're going to be taking out the staff section, aren't we? So certain skills will be replacing what they do, I guess.
Yeah, sure. So they will be functionally replaced. I don't know if it will be on a one-to-one sort of literal mapping there, or if it will be something a little bit different. So rather than, I don't think it will, we're not really thinking in terms of that you'll have a skill that's like physical coaching and it will be out of 20, but more like you have sort of bespoke skills like level 1 physical coaching or level 2 physical coaching maybe, or something like that. And then, or if you learn the physical coaching or you max it out, it then opens up other possibilities for you to specialize in the specific physical attributes, let's say. So sort of more like a skills tree where the paths that you take unlock different possibilities in the future. So you would learn something like coaching, and then you could choose to maybe specialize in coaching youth players or senior players. And then when you specialize in coaching youth players, you could choose if you want to specialize in like specific sort of paths or specific different attributes, or you might just want to you might just be happy to have quite a decent coaching level and just generally be pretty good at coaching youth, and then want to move on to other skills rather than venturing further down that path. So some examples could be the coaching, and that, like we said, I think just youth, senior, and then expanding into maybe different sort of groups of skills, and then into maybe more subgroup type stuff, and then into specific attributes. So this might be coaching, youth coaching, maybe it's like technical coaching, and then goal scoring, and then finishing maybe, or maybe it will be one level less. It's less about the specifics, really more about the concept. That's one example. And then we have the physio obviously as well, so maybe you level up your physiotherapy, and when you get to a high enough level, you then be able to maybe specialise in like injury prevention or maybe injury recovery, like the physio attributes we have, but also maybe there's other possibilities in this space. We might be able to have just bespoke, more sort of specific skills, like you could maybe have different types of injuries in the future, and you could specialise in treating different types of injuries. Maybe sprains or fractures or whatever. We could have different maybe types or different parts of the body that get injured, and also maybe it could be that specific. Maybe it wouldn't. Maybe it could be something like if your player picks up a knock in the match, but he can plough on, so to speak. That when he's getting patched up on the pitch to continue, maybe you can do a better job of patching him up, so to speak. Maybe you have a better magical spray or something for him, and when he gets...
I think we need to bring the sponge back, Nick. Yeah. Magic sponge. They're not allowed anymore. It's unbelievable.
But yeah, maybe they'd end up with a higher condition or something. So, I think there's obviously a lot of ideas here. We're giving some examples, I think, because this is easy to wrap your head around and translate, because we already have the staff that are already doing these things. So I think this is quite easy to wrap your head around. Other examples could be maybe like a finance branch of skills, which could do something like different things, like maybe increasing the interest rate you get on savings, or maybe allowing some kind of overdraft facility for your club, or modifying probably increasing the various bits maybe to improve other parts of finances, like increasing your shareholder dividend threshold, or maybe you get a bit of a better price when you sell your players back to the pool, maybe, or when you signing players, there's a reduction in the signing fee or the agent's fee, or maybe you can get to pay your players a little bit less wages, things like that. So I think they're all things that is quite easy probably to wrap your head around. I'm not sure really how many exact examples I'd want to give, because the point of this exercise in many ways is to want to know what people can think of on their own accord and the ideas that people have, and we sort of intentionally want to not influence people too heavily here, and really want to see in many ways all the different wide, wonderful and crazy ideas that everyone has. And I think there's a lot more chance of having real out of the box type thinking here, the less we influence and push people in specific directions here. But yeah, so there's I'm not sure if we want to give more specific examples, but we'll be implementing, when we implement other parts of the game in the future, I think the skills could have a lot of influence on all of these things quite heavily. And this is why we want to bring this to discussion now, so that the foundations are being laid and it's in the back of everyone's minds for everything that ever happens to the game going forwards. We're interested to hear what people have to say. Obviously, it's a bit hard to know without features that aren't in the game yet. I think that very much is just a bit wild, I guess you could say, with the ideas, because it's a bit hard to know. But by all means, still give them. It's will help us to understand the types of things that people are thinking, how they would like these features to work, but also anything with how the game works right now that could have a skill that impacts it in some way right now. That's obviously a lot more concrete and a lot more easy for other users as well to sort of fully understand and agree or disagree or discuss or enhance or modify or expand the suggestions. So I think we might have two types of suggestions in many ways here, which is one type of suggestion that works with the game how it currently is and could be, could slot in and could be functional with how the game currently is, and another type of suggestion that is dependent on other stuff being added to the game in the future in order for the suggestion to make any sense. I think it might pan out that way. So I hope, is that good enough, Steve? Or do you think would you like to add anything more there? Or?
No, I think we've covered that fairly well, Nick. I think we, like you say, we want to open this up to the users and get their ideas without. Obviously, we've got a base idea of how we want to go with this, and I think we've got that across fairly well. It's just a case of getting some ideas from users, really. I'm definitely hopeful that people will come up with a few things that we've not even thought of.
Yeah, I really hope. I mean, we really do hope that this could be something that is vast, not a silly little narrow thing that you just just happens in the background. It doesn't really mean anything. We really want it to be something that's actually adds a lot to the game, really influences the way that you can play, you can compete, create different ways to play the game, and for it to be really exciting when you actually do achieve something, because you get the extras. We want it to feel good when you achieve these things, and I think part of that is that you've achieved something and you essentially get a reward for that achievement, a direct reward that actually helps your team, helps your club, and you get to choose what it is. And I think that will make achieving things a lot more meaningful than it's simply just well done, you've won 10 matches in a row. It appears on a list and you now have a tick next to it, and that's it. So hopefully this will make people just a lot more excited and motivated to achieve things, and also just for it to really expand the gameplay and create a lot of interesting possibilities, sort of real, genuine, different ways for people to approach the game. So yeah, we're definitely thinking in terms of lots of skills here, not 5 or 10 or something like that, but more like 100, I think, minimum, really. That's how we're imagining this. And obviously, whatever we end up starting with here, I think it's something that it definitely obviously has almost infinite scope to expand over time after that as well. I think it really is almost like potentially a never-ending type feature here. It could always be improved, and it's something that scales brilliantly, really, in that every time you ever do anything else with the game, every time you ever add any other feature to the game, this feature then has extra scope to improve from its current state every single time. So yeah, just really, really convinced that this will just has a lot more scope to do a lot better things for the game than the current setup that we have with the staff, pretty much. So I think the other thing as well that we would like to do, I mean, in the past, for example, the transfer system changes, like we couldn't, for a whole bunch of reasons, which we might go into a little bit later on, we couldn't really give people like advance notice that was going to happen, if that makes sense, that we were going to change the transfer system, that we're going to remove the cheating from the game. We may be going to that a bit later, a little bit, but the main point really is that we couldn't really do that, but there are parts of the game that we can, and this is one of them, and there will be more, and pretty much all of the extra gameplay or things that we want to add to the game, we want this skill system to be integral to everything. So, you know, when stadiums come, or youth academies, or scouting, or training, or whatever, we want skills to be part of all of these things in the future. So, you know, we would like to, you know, where possible, to discuss these features or involve these features with the user base more going forwards to try and do things, you know, just to involve more, either where we can, to sort of pre-plan in advance, like this, for example, getting people involved really, really early on, or other features we might maybe do more like a skeleton implementation of them where possible, and then enhance it over time based on feedback from users. So maybe the transfer system is an example of that. When we replaced the transfer system, it really was the skeleton of the new system, and then we've done a big update. So I think generally speaking, we just, where possible, we just want to try and tell people about what's happening in the future and involve them in the process, where we're able to do it without it causing us a lot more grief than. Essentially, obviously, we want to involve people and we want to give people the heads up, but also we want it to actually help the project, right?
Sure.
So, and this is one of those things where people might have really good ideas. It could really influence the direction that this takes. So it could be really helpful to the project. So, and I'm sure there'll be other things in the future that fall into this bucket as well.
Great. All right. I suppose the message from that, guys, is if you've got any ideas, any thoughts on what we've discussed for a start, but also any thoughts on what kind of achievements, any ideas you've seen, the very base ideas that Nick and I have mentioned, for example, winning a game, winning the SP Cup, to go from two extremes. What other kind of achievements do you think we could have in the game to earn your skill points with, and what do you think these skills could be? So give us some feedback on that. Let's move on, because we wanted to talk about a few other things on this podcast, didn't we, Nick?
I just maybe got one last point I just quickly quickly thought of, is that this is also the reason why the staff contract negotiation system is not been changed yet, just in case people ever wondered why it hasn't been brought in line with the transfer system for the players. The reason for that is that the work would be throwaway, because we want to change the whole system. So that's why it's still under the old system.
Good point. All right, thank you, Nick. Right, the other thing we wanted to do on this podcast was just talk quickly about a few of the questions we received. Obviously, a lot of these are to do with the transfer system. So we got a few that are just very, very difficult to answer in forum posts. So I guess we'll start with this one, Nick. I'll generalise this question a little bit. Users are saying they've been disadvantaged by these changes to the transfer system. Maybe if they'd known about them, they could have planned better. Why do we not give more advance notice to this kind of thing?
Yeah, sure. There's multiple facets to this. So we'll just have to tackle them one at a time, I think. The first one really is just that with some changes like the transfer system changes, it doesn't really matter how much notice you ever give anybody. It's never going to be enough, I think, is one point here. Now, it might be enough for somebody, but generally speaking, it's never going to be enough for everybody, I think is the point, really. So we did it 7 days before the end of the season. People had 7 days advance notice to sort the situation out, and it might have been the case that had we have given a few days more notice, that that would have been acceptable to some people. 10 is acceptable, whereas 7 is unacceptable. But by and large, for most users, if 7 was unacceptable, then 10 also would have been unacceptable, and if 10 was unacceptable, then 15 would have been unacceptable. There isn't any amount of time that it ever would have been an acceptable amount of time for everybody. So I think that's one thing to bear in mind. Another thing is that, which is largely covered in the announcements for it really, which is that it was having this knowledge in advance was completely abusable. If we actually gave the knowledge in advance of the actual system being implemented, just completely abusable, in that that you could sell players for the greater of the new price or the previous price. So if you give people advance notice, then they just go out and buy a whole bunch of players, and then if they go up in value, you've just made a bunch of money, and if they don't, then you can just sell them all for the previous value. So then everybody would just be going out buying a bunch of players, and the whole thing would be a farce, basically.
Yeah, it's just a no-lose gamble, isn't it? You just couldn't do it.
Oh yeah, it's literally just like being able to buy a lottery ticket, and if you lose, you get a refund on the ticket.
Yeah.
Like, why wouldn't you just go out and buy all of the lottery tickets you possibly could afford if there was that kind of offer out there? So. And there's always lots of. So another one is really like internal planning. So we knew that change was a high risk change in regards to season finishing, something going wrong with it, and actually something did go wrong with season finishing. So we were right; it was high risk. There was you can check on the form, but there was this issue whereby the values of the players who were put into the pool from the users who were removed from the game. There was a problem with that, and we had to sort that out in the early hours of the morning. So we knew that there was a high risk change, which meant that we couldn't do it unless we had the appropriate staff available to work all through the night of the season finishing, to sort out if there was a problem, which we had in September. So we could do the change in September, but we don't have that in October. The key staff member that we need is not available to work through the night all night on the last day of October, and has told us that in advance. So we can't. That means that we can't do any high risk changes that require him to help us to sort it out if there's a problem. So in other words, it wasn't an option for us to do this change in October. So either we had to do it in September, and we couldn't do it until it was ready and tested, and basically we did it as soon as we possibly could after that was the case. So either we did it when we did it, or we did it later in September, but that wouldn't have helped anything, giving people 3 days notice instead of 7 days notice. That would have, I don't see any way that could have helped the situation. So either we had to do it as early as possible in September, which is when we did it, or we had to do it in November. They were our two options. And we just really felt that the problems with the transfer system and the players not having correct values, and that having a knock-on impact that we discussed for the reasons change, but basically in simple terms that there was no reason for anybody to sell the best players because they're all underpaid and undervalued, so you're paying them less than you should, so it's worth keeping them, and you don't get a good price for them, so why would you sell them? And it was creating a real problem for a complete sort of dearth of inactivity at the high end of the transfer market. And we just felt that problem needed to be sorted out sooner rather than later, and that we didn't want to artificially postpone it till the early November. And quite frankly, we think that the majority of people who were really unhappy about it would have been unhappy about it still anyway had we have done it at the start of November. there's facets here. There's people being unhappy or unhappy about stuff, and then there's also the fact that this project needs to, we need to make sure it progresses. We need to make sure that it's successful. We don't really have the luxury of artificially delaying stuff for 2 months, unless it's necessary, and it just wasn't necessary in this case. Really, we couldn't hold this back in terms of holding the project up, but also in terms of the fact that there were clear fundamental gameplay issues. The transfer market had real problems. The game had real problems. It needed to be fixed, and artificially delaying it until November was when we could have been deployed in September wasn't the correct decision at the time. And if we could do it all again, we'd do it this way. Basically, it was absolutely clearly the right thing to do as far as the project is concerned, whilst acknowledging the fact that obviously some people were unhappy, totally within their rights to be unhappy. Any change to the game that sort of fundamentally changes things and helps some users more than others and hurts some users more than others is always, it's always not going to, everyone's going to be happy with it. That's obvious. It's not, it's just the way it is. The game's in development. There will be changes. Obviously, we replaced the transfer system. The old one, had years to evolve to the state that it was and become relatively stable. And this one is just brand new, and it's going to need at least a little bit of time before it becomes completely stable. And it's still very early days yet. We hope that these changes will help it become stable. We feel like it already have done a long way towards that, and hopefully we won't have to rock the boat so much in the future. But it's just, if you have to rock the boat, you have to make the changes. It really doesn't matter how we do it or when we do it or anything around it. People are going to be aggrieved regardless. This is a thing. So there isn't any right way for us to do it that everybody would be happy with. It's just a lose-lose situation. But we can't also never make any changes to the game, because every time we try to do anything, people will be unhappy as well.
Yeah, very true. Okay, I think that covers that one pretty well. So I'm going to move on to the next question now, Nick. Quite simply, I suppose a few people have asked this in different ways. Why was the tax threshold not raised to support these changes?
So I think there's a couple aspects to this. So one is that, and this has been brought up in the past. So, why didn't we do X at the same time as Y? So an example of this: why didn't we do the improvements to the transfer system at the same time that we implemented the transfer system? And the answer to that is, one, we can't do everything at once. We have to do some things first and some things second and some things third. And the other part is that we really genuinely want to not do throwaway work. We want to, when we do stuff, it's done properly. And by and large, in order to achieve that, we have to actually analyze and look at stuff and see how it's unfolding in the game. So we could have tried to have done more with the transfer system on implementation, but it wouldn't have ended up how it did end up. That's for sure. Like, we wouldn't have. There are aspects of what happened that was completely based on user feedback and not stuff that was on the table being discussed as options before we implemented the transfer system. So an example of this would be the fact that now the sell price is kind of masked or hidden, and you don't really know it from sort of like the inherent ability of the player, because it's just tied to the buy price, and that was something that a lot of people wanted. That wouldn't have happened. So that there are things of how it evolved with the update that was a result of suggestions, and there's other stuff that just evolved as a result of us needing to see how people actually interacted with it, actually getting the feedback with players that are undervalued, overvalued, and actually trying to address it in a way that addresses all of the problems and the feedback that we were receiving about the system, rather than trying to do a bunch of work that guesses in advance of what all of the problems will be. It's more efficient for us to do things in such a way whereby we make a change and then we analyse the impact and then we do a proper solution to the problem. rather than trying to guess everything in advance and do temporary hack jobs all over the place. Because one, quite often we're going to get the hack jobs wrong anyway, and two, it's all throwaway. So, and we just don't have the luxury of doing throwaway work that doesn't need to be done. So a lot of this applies to this question as well, and that why don't we do something temporary that's throwaway work? Well, the answer is we don't really have a lot of luxury to do that. Two, even if we had tried to guess something, we could have guessed it wrong, and there's like multiple facets to this. Like, for example, yes, we could have got it right in regards to in somebody's opinion, but this change affects everybody. If you did something temporary like this, it affects everybody in that whatever this tax amnesty is, it affects everybody, because you're really putting users who aren't able to leverage or take advantage of that tax amnesty at a massive disadvantage, basically, if you do something like this. So there's a lot of aspects to consider here, and it's just not really possible to do that analysis and that consideration with no data to work with, no understanding to work with. You could have, absolutely, we could have done something that would make some people happy, but there's every chance that for every person, whatever temporary thing we did made happy, it would have made at least one other person unhappy, basically. So you're just shuffling the problem around, really. And when there is a problem, there is a fundamental problem here, in that the users at the higher end of the game are sort of being put in a vice. They're being squeezed financially. There is a fundamental problem, and it needs a proper solution. It doesn't need a hack job. It needs a real solution that is balanced and that addresses some of the problems that we have. We need to continue to address the problems with aspects of the game, like you don't really want it to be possible to accumulate ridiculous amounts of money, because that just has lots of knock-on impacts. But at the same time, you need people to be able to sort of reasonably have the ability to operate their club, and to be able to buy players and sell players and do things reasonably. And it might be the case that you are a bit squeezed and there is some skill and you have to navigate the system and do some stuff to work around it and be a little bit smart about maybe the timing that you buy and sell players and the prices you pay and all that sort of stuff. We absolutely want all of that. But obviously at the moment the users at the top are being, it's beyond what you would call reasonable, if that makes sense. It's quite difficult to operate within it for a lot of people. It's definitely possible, and there definitely are users at the top that are doing it, but it's just really difficult. The difficulty factor is too high, and we need a proper solution to that, which we now have, that we want to implement this month. So we want to formalise like a club sort of level or progression system that kind of already exists in the game for the Legends Cup, i.e. that all clubs will have this bronze, silver or gold status, and that status will also change some of the other aspects of the gameplay to help you advance the progression of your club. So essentially what this means is when you sort of advance from bronze to silver, it is like a promotion, so to speak. It is like you have leveled up, and that it meaningfully impacts the game, and it is something that you really want to achieve, basically. And the first part of that will be that it will increase the dividend threshold from your club. So the bronze level clubs will remain with the 10 million dividend threshold, but the silver level clubs will have it increased to 20 million, and the gold level clubs will have it increased to 30 million. But if you exceed those levels, then the rate that you pay for the amount that's over and above your threshold will be 20% tax instead of 10% tax, and that will apply from the end of this season. It's obviously not releasing the client yet. The update's going to be later this month, but we're trying to give people as much advance notice as possible here. So, but it will be released. It'll be later this month, probably not till the second half of this month that you actually see this in the client. But you will know what level you are for what Legends Cup you're in, and if you're not in the Legends Cup, this is only going to apply to a small amount of people really that are listening to this podcast, but if you're not in the Legends Cup, you can work out what level you are because of your reputation range. If it's up to 35, you're bronze, and if it's between 35 and 50, you're silver, and if it's over 50, you're gold. Basically the same criteria that dictates what, if you can look on the criteria in the game guide to qualify for the Legends Cup. So the reputation ranges for which one you'd end up with.
And I'm sure you users are probably aware of this, but you can find that out in your club profile.
Yeah. But I think for the vast majority of people, they'll just be in the Legends Cup. So it's just literally, if you're in the bronze one, you're bronze. If you're in the silver one, you're silver. And if you're in the gold one, you're gold. But the reputation ranges probably could help you from the perspective that I just said, from the perspective of planning for future seasons. Like if you're on the brink of moving from bronze to silver or silver to gold, and you had a good season, you know that you're going to end up maybe going from silver to gold, and then this season you have the 20 million, but next season you'll have the 30 million.
Yeah. So hopefully this gets the correct balance between allowing the users at their particular levels the amount of flexibility they need to work with the transfer market, but also to retain that certain level of difficulty. So hopefully that gives people a good idea of why it wasn't changed at the time, but why it was being monitored, and why a change will be forthcoming. I'm sure closer to the time we'll pop round something saying the exact timescales of these things, just so everyone's aware. Okay, on to the next question. Why are we doing the Twitch stream for the World Cup now and not doing the end of season one?
Yep. So I don't know if this is better for you to answer, Steve, or me. I don't really know. You're the one who does it.
Well, a bit of both, really. I think it's I think the general reason is it better showcases the game. The old stream, as fun as it was going through and celebrating everyone's achievements, it really was very top heavy in that the experienced users got to celebrate. But if you were a fairly new user to the game, you had very, very little chance of even getting a mention. And I think a lot of the time, a lot of people were listening to it to hopefully get a mention. Whereas in the World Cup stream, I think anyone who listened to the one we did, the September one, it was just really enjoyable. It flowed really nicely, and it showed off the strengths of the game, which are really the people interacting, people having a bit of fun, playing games, quick fire, and just taking each other on and enjoying it. And it was really, really very, very positive kind of stream, I thought. And I would say that's probably the main reason for this. And obviously, every one of these we do, it does take up time to do. And people like Nick. I know Nick doesn't talk that much on the streams sometimes, but he's there, and how was it you described it, Nick? Kept the hamster wheel going, and these things have to be done in the background, and it takes resource to do more than one of these. So it's better to focus on something that we feel promotes the game really well, and clearly it creates more interest in what's at the moment the only monetized feature in the game. So we want people to get involved in that, and gives newer users a bit of a chance to get their name up in lights effectively. Pick one of the teams, do well, and you're going to get a lot of mentions. So hopefully do you feel that answers it okay, Nick?
Yeah, I think so. And there is a whole very, very actually important facet that you didn't cover, which is for the people who aren't actually users of the game. So for the people who randomly stumble upon it on Twitch, or for the people who are thinking of playing the game, it just showcases the game so much better. I mean, we've had in the past, I know Con and myself, and we've had the missus watch the stream, and it really was a case of being completely bored to tears with the season roundups. I mean, they were dreadfully boring for somebody who isn't playing the game.
How dare you?
Sorry, Steve. But in fairness, Con came up with a plan to have his missus watch it first, and I think he was a little bit upset with the quality of with how fun and interesting she found it. Whereas had them watch the World Cup one, and actually, I think this is pretty important for somebody who isn't playing the game. It was a lot easier to sit through 3 hours of that than it was to sit through 1 hour of basically clicking on league tables, and it was just literally clicking on lists of just league table after league table after league table. So I think the fact that it is 3 times longer and more interesting does say a lot from the perspective of the person who isn't playing the game.
Yeah.
And we do obviously want to do stuff for the users who are playing the game. That's really important, and one of the primary reasons why we do it. But it's also really important that we do actually showcase the game, and that for people who are thinking about it or stumble across it, that they are left with a positive impression and think maybe they might want to try it. That's really important, and I think the World Cup stream does a lot better job of that than it is to sort of basically spend a whole bunch of time doing something that doesn't really show anything about how you actually play the game. This is the key point. The World Cup stream showcases elements of the actual gameplay, whereas the season roundup basically showcases pretty much nothing to do with the actual gameplay, what you would expect to do if you were playing the game. It doesn't really show anything at all. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Yep, great. All right, thanks, Nick. I think that covers that one. Right, we've just got a couple more questions here that we want to briefly have a go at quickly, but I'm going to very much summarise a question here that has been asked in various different guises, which is really, why don't we give out formulas for everything? So, for example, someone might ask, why don't you tell us exactly how someone's transfer value is calculated? So, just an example, but yeah, why don't we give out formulas for everything?
Yeah, so I think firstly, just internally, we have a policy in this space, which is that we don't give out the precise formulas. We try to give out some information so people have something to work with here. So we typically say the components or the factors that go towards something. So in the case of the transfer value, we say this is a list of things that influence that, or in the case of wages, these are the things that go towards calculating that or influencing that, so that people do have some idea and something to work with. But we don't give out the formulas really, because one of the key parts to people enjoying a computer game is the discovery element. People it needs to be challenging, they need to learn, they need to discover things, and it needs to take some kind of effort. And in many ways, it needs to be a puzzle that you can never solve, really. You could always improve, and you could always solve more of everything, and you could go from knowing sort of 20% to 30% to 40% to 50% and get high, maybe 80, 90% or even 90-something percent. But if you ever actually get to 100% in a game that you've just solved and you just know everything, typically speaking, you just quit. It's boring at that point for most people. So if you kind of think about any games that you've played in the past and you've just finished that game and you just know how everything works, you probably don't really play it anymore, because from the day that you completed it, you understood it all, you sort of solved the puzzle, it's finished for you. So if we gave out the formulas, it would be sort of clear the exact optimal way to play, and then everyone would just play that way, and you just take away a lot of the discovery, a lot of the reward for putting the effort in. Just a lot of people just wouldn't find that fun at all, really. I mean, some people might, but a lot of people wouldn't, and most people want to discover things, have fun, trial and error, learn over time.
And I also think it makes it quite interesting for in-user community, people generally discussing how they think things work, and that side of the game I think is always quite interesting. And it's some people like to share information, some people don't. But when you think you've discovered something, or maybe you've discovered a skill you think, or you've discovered a player that maybe other people have overlooked. I know that's a slightly different example than what we're talking about, but it's all the same feeling. I think it all adds to the experience.
Yeah, definitely. With the community side of things, definitely. You could look at simulation-based style games, and a lot of the community-created content, whether it's an online game or a single-player game, a lot of it is based on just people sharing what they've discovered, what they've learned with other people. It's a huge part of the community created content. These are the best tactics, or these are the best players, or this is the best way to do things, or so it's really important to the community side of things. I can get why, obviously, when we change things in the game, we've changed stuff recently, obviously, with the transfer system. So, obviously, over time, people had discovered a lot with the old transfer system, that there was a lot of time for people to, learn a lot of things and apply them and develop knowledge over time, and that accumulated knowledge, I guess, if you like. And now we've got a new system, and obviously what was learnt previously is largely non-applicable anymore, and people have to learn again, and they don't know everything anywhere near as much as what they had learned before. Well, I think this is by and large just one of the unfortunate parts of playing a game that is in the middle of development, is that things will change. There isn't a lot we can do about this. We need to progress the game, we need to add features, we need to work towards completing the game, basically. And it means things will change. And we're not going to give out the formulas for everything for the reason, so it's really just going to, whenever something changes, people aren't going to know, generally speaking, exactly where they stand. They're going to have to learn that over time. It is the way it is, but also that is kind of the way that every single online game is as well. It's not just this one. And there's even games that are completed in that, as long as they're maintaining it, which they generally are if it's an online game, they are changing stuff. They are disrupt things. Certain strategies are overpowered, certain strategies are underpowered, or elements or characters or whatever the case may be. They'll make changes to fix the imbalances in the game, and that essentially then means that everything that you've learned, or ways that you approach the game, it all counts for nothing. You have to change, you have to learn again. It's just how games are. They evolve, they change. There's even a term for it. It's the meta game. It's the meta of the game, which is basically with the current rules of the game, how the game is currently set up, how are users playing it in order to try to get an advantage over it, the best advantages over everybody else. And it's just a well-known facet of online games that the meta is sort of an ever-evolving, ever-changing thing. So as long as the game exists and it's online, it will always be evolving to some degree.
All right, last thing I want to talk about, Nick. Just something that's come up quite a bit recently, and I know it's already been answered to an extent in a forum post, in the forum reply. Just thought we could discuss the fact that values fluctuate; they're quite volatile, particularly for the higher price players. So, what's the reasoning for that? Again, I don't want to go into detail about this, but just a quick reasoning, just to assure people that there's nothing too wrong here. It's just
so they fluctuate. On a day-to-day basis, it's largely because the factors that feed into it are changing. So this might be how well they're playing, but probably more likely to do with all the sort of the transfer activity that's happening that is dictating the attributes that users feel are important, therefore having a knock-on impact to which attributes are important, combined with the other factors like how well the player is playing. They're changing, and it's just causing the price to change on a daily basis. Now, we could do things to try to minimise those fluctuations if we wanted to, but it's not really necessarily even clear if the price is fluctuating on a day-to-day basis is even a bad thing, because it creates, if you've got a player that you know he's generally worth around 10 million, but one day he's worth 9.5, the next day he's worth 10, the next day he's worth 10.5, the next day he might be worth 9.75 or something, but when he's worth 10.5, you might, if you're already thinking of selling him, you might think, okay, I'm going to sell him today because it's a good price. So it might produce sort of like impromptu, like you get a feel for what the price is about, and if you're thinking of selling the player but not quite sure, you can monitor price daily and you can wait until it's a good price, so to speak, with knowing that there's no guarantee that it might ever get back to where it was in the past. So So it's not necessarily bad. It is bad from the perspective that just generally speaking, if the price goes down, it upsets people more than how good they feel when the price goes up. So you're essentially constantly making for people who are inclined to be affected by these types of things, they're just going to be really angry and upset all the time because it's going to go up and down, and every time it goes down they're going to be upset, but every time it goes up they're not going to be happy. So a thing that doesn't work very well from that regard. So we probably but right now we're just monitoring it. Honestly don't know where it will end up. In regards to the dips at the end of the season, there's a couple aspects of that. So one, it's due to the aging, because at the moment all players just age at the end of the season, and the age is a factor to the value. Now we could change it so that players progressively age throughout the season, which means that rather than them sort of dipping right at the end, they'd kind of dip a little bit as each day passes. So it wouldn't be this big dip at the end of the season. But again, obviously that plays into the transfer activity, in that if you know that all your players are going to dip in value at the end of the season, then there's obviously an extra incentive to sell them at the end of the season. If you know all your players will drop in 10 to 20% in value, then there's a clear reason to want to sell them at the end of the season before the next season. But then you've also got the dividend tax to work around, which means that if you're selling to go over the threshold, you're going to end up having to pay some of that in the threshold anyway. But if you're under the threshold, it's different. It adds definitely stuff in that space to the game. Big decisions to make and to navigate around. But all in all, just monitoring it at the moment. There's definitely an aspect where people aren't happy about it, like when they see the value go down. Absolutely. And however, does that still exist in the same way if people obviously now everybody, it got to the end of the season, the values went down, they're not happy that they went down, but now they know they're going to go down at the end of this month, and they know that they're going to be unhappy about it when it happens, and they know that they could sell them beforehand. Is it the same situation? And everyone's going to be different. We're just monitoring the overall situation, really. We just want to get more feedback and analysis, because I think it's the case that clearly the values do need to change, and it really shouldn't be the case that they're just always going up or they're just always going down. Because if that's the case, then essentially you will know that, okay, so today the value is more than yesterday, therefore I should just keep the player because his value is just going to keep going up and up and up. Or, his value started to go down, quick sell him because it's just going to go down every single day. So clearly there needs to be some element of fluctuation. Maybe it's the case that things are fluctuating too much at the moment, but where's the correct balance in the middle? And we just want to monitor things to make sure that when we change it, we hopefully only change it once.
Great. Okay. Right. Thanks a lot, Nick. I think that's covered quite a few of the questions that have been asked over the last few days. And just going all the way back to the start, the main topic of this podcast was obviously about potential future implementations of skills, manager skills and achievements. So again, if you've got ideas in that area around, we've talked a little bit about our base thoughts on this, but we'd love to see people listing skills and listing achievements potentially that we could use. We're definitely looking to have a lot of them. So any ideas you've got would be very, very welcome. So great. I think that about wraps it up for what Nick and I wanted to cover this time. So we'll post a link to this up on the forum. So if you've got anything you want to know about today's podcast, please ask it in the thread. We'll do our best to cover it. If you've got any questions, again, that we feel are appropriate for podcasts to answer, then we'll do our best to answer them next time. But other than that, thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.